Welcome in this week. It's the College Football Game Time podcast. We do it every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock here on the 92.9 The Game Facebook page. Glad to have you along with us this week. Guys, we've gotten through the draft. We've gotten through everything. We're going to start previewing some college football, kind of taking you through the SEC and the ACC. But before we get to that, we thought it would be a good opportunity here for us to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about recruiting. It's been an odd year. A lot of guys, because of the pandemic, ended up committing and in some cases signing with schools that they had never set foot on. Beginning next month, everything is about to change, and recruiting is, we've kind of come to know it, at least in terms of the official visits and that sort of thing. Everything is going to start to go back to normal, I think, a little bit starting in June. So we're going to get a jump start on it and talk a little bit about recruiting tonight.
Yeah, no, not only that, but some players missed a full season of play. So a lot of players don't have that senior year of tape. So maybe they had to jump to a program maybe that was, in their opinion, below their worth or whatever. But, I mean, it's what happens when you don't have that senior year of tape. I mean, you lose a full season. I mean, it was brutal. And honestly, the sooner we can get back to normal, the better.
We're going to visit here with John Garcia Jr. John covers recruiting. He was the Alabama beat writer back, and I've known John for probably 10 years or so now. And back when he and I first met, he was the beat writer for the University of Alabama. So he has covered recruiting for a long time. My favorite story about John Garcia is that he and I, we were talking one time right after fall camp had opened at Alabama, and Alabama needed a quarterback that year. And there was all this speculation about who the quarterback at Alabama was going to be. And John told me, he said, from the practice that I have seen, he said, it is clear that Jalen Hurts is the best quarterback at Alabama. And sure enough, that was the year that Jalen Hurts burst onto the scene, so to speak, and kind of led Alabama, and they had a ton of success. You guys know the story from there, but he was the first guy that really kind of tipped me off about Jalen Hurts and just how good that kid can be. So looking forward to visiting with John for a few minutes. We actually taped this interview earlier today, so that part of our Facebook Live isn't really live, but we'll be back. We'll be back live. We'll talk a little bit in particular about Georgia and Georgia Tech and their recruiting. We'll take a look back at this 2021 signing class for both teams, and we'll take a look ahead at 2022 and what is to come for both Georgia and Georgia Tech. It's College Football Game Time podcast. Earlier today, we had the chance to sit down with John Garcia Jr. from SI All-American. We got a few minutes to talk a little bit of recruiting with John. Always glad to, when we get the opportunity to be able to visit with John Garcia Jr. He has been on the recruiting trail for a number of years now, and he's been my go-to guy for a long time when I want to know what's happening in the world of recruiting. John, I want to start, before we get into specific teams or talking about particular kids, the impact that the COVID pandemic had on recruiting feels like maybe we're kind of starting to come out of that on the other end. How has it impacted and changed recruiting as we knew it?
Really, Chris, it's changed everything. It's a huge question to try to answer, but really it changed the entire process, like you said, of how recruiting works. Typically, you identify and then you sort of validate from a coach's perspective. Well, that validation process was really eliminated from the traditional sense. There was no in-person validation of any kind, whether it's the prospect traveling to the campus or the coach traveling to the high school and sometimes the home of the prospect. So what COVID really created was the necessity of digital recruiting and an adaptation of every college coaching staff learning how to jump on a Zoom call, work FaceTime, work social media, and really use your Friday night evaluation skill more than ever before. We didn't have this recruiting offseason with 7-on-7s and camps and sort of all the underwear Olympics that we've become accustomed to. So I think that class of 2021 and for a large portion of this rising senior class of 2022, it was about the evaluators, the coaches who could really grind the tape and figure out on Friday nights who could do what, and then validating that information, turning their reporters' hats on and digging into information at the high school level, 7-on-7, whatever is going on with Prospect X. So I think it really changed the entire game from the coach's perspective and from the recruit's perspective. You didn't get that look at campus. So many dozens and hundreds of kids signed with schools that they've never been to. And even in this 22 class, they're committed to schools that they've never been to. That's why there's so much excitement build around the month of June. You're seeing recruiting slow down, and everyone's just waiting for that calendar to flip over to hit the road and really see what this next step is going to look like. A lot of kids want to see the school that they've picked for the first time, and it's certainly been a long road, and there's a lot of excitement about June, and rightfully so.
So the official visits can resume then in June. What about in-home visits with coaches? Is that going to be back into the picture again in June?
It won't be in the month of June. It'll be at a later date, but there is a sense that this is just the beginning of opening the whole deal back up. So typically when you talk about in-home visits, we're getting closer to that December signing period. So I think we're on track at this point to be able to push towards that once again. But there's no doubt that the official visits are really the sort of rock star of the month of June. Many programs have tried to schedule 20, 30 official visitors for the month of June to really get that impression out of there. And it makes sense for programs that aren't necessarily the no-brainer or blue blood type programs. You've got to get kids on campus. I mean, think of first or even second year coaching staffs. You've got to get kids on campus to show your product beyond what they can find on a virtual tour or on, or based on reputation or perception.
I want to start kind of close to home here, and talk first about Georgia Tech. Jeff Collins, there seems to be a real buzz around what they're doing in recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
They've built and have put together, at least so far, granted it's early, they've put together a pretty good recruiting class thus far for the class of 22.
And it's what it should be for a great Georgia Tech class, right? You're getting in-state prospects, right? Hello, the Atlanta Metro is as good as it gets, really nationally, any single year at really every position, right? I mean, look at the quarterback heaven that Atlanta has become. But then you're also dipping into the state of Florida, right? So that's what you want if you're a Georgia Tech fan. Push on that ACC footprint, but really stay close to home because you can. And everybody I talk to who talks about Jaron Willis, the linebacker out of Lee County there in South Georgia, raves about him. I had one evaluator tell me, if this kid is not in your SI 99, I'll quit looking at kids for you. And this is a hybrid linebacker, do-it-all prospect. Again, the type of guy you need to build the new reputation around. And I think the reason that some big-time commits have already jumped on board for Georgia Tech is because of the coaching staff. I think Jeff Collins, there's a youth exuberance with that group, and they're really doing well on social media with marketing. They're sort of reminding kids of all you can do at Georgia Tech. Obviously, selling the city of Atlanta as the only major Power 5 school in Atlanta. They're harping on that and leaning on it and selling it at a very high level right now. And I think that's the type of program that the month of June will actually help even more, because now you can sell it in person instead of based on a kid taking a visit when he was young or perception. So I think that's the type of program that has a chance to even recruit at a better level once things open up and you can get kids on campus for camps, and then in the fall for games, which is really still probably one of the bigger selling points for any recruit is that game day atmosphere. So I think Georgia Tech is certainly trending the right way, and it comes with that coaching staff, the youth, the familiarity, a lot of legacy coaches on that staff. So they care, and you can tell it makes a lot of sense.
Are you surprised at how well Kirby Smart has recruited as a head coach?
No, because he recruits the same way he did as a positional coach and the same way he did as a coordinator. Kirby Smart is an intense person. I think that carries into probably all aspects of his life, but having tracked him on the recruiting trail for a decade, he is an intense, in-your-face person. And particularly with defensive recruits, which that's his specialty, kids resonate with that. They call him a little crazy, a little fun. You want that mix, right? Look at what Ed Orgeron has done at LSU. They're the real counter to the Nick Saban serious business mode is that energy, right? That life. And Kirby has always been known as that type of recruiter. So I think for him to compartmentalize that as a head coach has been nothing short of remarkable. And I think where the surprise is the offensive success I think Georgia has had on the recruiting trail, not only recruiting at the high school level, but now obviously as we'll see in this fall, recruiting transfers. That's not something that I think any coach has really had a lot of experience with. Everyone's sort of learning on the job because the transfer portal is still new. It still feels a little bit new. And now the rules are allowing for more fluidity than ever. So the coaches who are taking advantage of that are the ones that are going to survive, survive all that fluidity and volatility in the market that is a college football roster.
So Arch Manning, the grandson of Archie Manning, the nephew of Eli and Peyton Manning, has narrowed his list down to 5. He's got 5 visits scheduled: Clemson, SMU, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia. I shouldn't say that he's limited it to these 5. Right. I think the door is still open for him, but these are the 5 visits that he's going to take. Couple of things about him. One, how good is this kid?
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt that name creates an unbelievable amount of pressure. I mean, when I got hired at SI, like the first voiceover I did was to follow Ross Dellinger's reporting of then freshman Arch Manning. That was like the first thing I did. I was like, man, I thought we were going to cover, the seniors of the world. So it tells you just the type of scope that Arch Manning is dealing with. But when you look at the numbers, you look at his frame and the production, and he's outpacing all of the other Mannings that have gone there. He started sooner than Peyton and Eli, and he's accumulated more wins and numbers sooner than those guys. So I just think that the difference is that this is happening in the age of social media. But, the college coaches who have offered him know what they're doing at the quarterback position. And you watch the kid, and you don't have to take very long to imagine him doing at least some of what, his uncles did at the quarterback position. He's got a great frame, 6'2", now up to 6'3". He's gained some weight finally, inching over 200-pound mark. And the mechanics, the arm, they're all there. But I think what makes him so interesting is that he's Cooper's son. Remember, Cooper was the wide receiver. And you see some of that athleticism that'll remind you more of Archie Manning a little bit when you watch his game. So not only does he have sort of the classic Manning quarterback traits, but now he's got some of the modern athleticism to go along with it. So honestly, he's sort of a no-brainer offer for a premier program or a quarterback-driven program, and that's what you're seeing on the list. He's got a who's who offer list. He's going to take some visits to compare, to his early trips. He's familiar with LSU, obviously the in-state school. He's got the connections to David Cutcliffe at Duke. North Carolina is involved here as well. So it's going to be an SEC, ACC, Southern footprint kind of battle. But no, then there's Steve Sarkisian in Texas. Then there's Dabo Swinney and Clemson. So it starts to get really interesting when you look at Manning. I think that's why for all prospects in all classes, it's really important to get on campus and take these trips. But with that last name, there's going to be a lot of pressure, but also a very business-like approach to handling the process. So I'm expecting him to be committed sooner rather than later relative to his classmates in that class of 2023, because he checks a lot of boxes physically, and I think mentally with the people he has around him, they're going to want to get that thing done pretty early to avoid at least as much hoopla as they can.
Are you surprised to see SMU on his list?
But yeah, sure. In terms of just overall reputation and perception, look, in that voiceover I talked about, he was a freshman. We were talking about, LSU, Ole Miss, Duke, Alabama, and LSU and Clemson. So, we didn't even talk about Texas at that point. So dipping into that state, I think, is quite interesting. But look, I mean, what SMU's been able to do offensively speaks for itself. They're not only, heavily productive at that quarterback position, but they're starting to translate some of that into the NFL with their skill talent. So I think offensive system is going to be really important here. It's going to be much more about what they can do specifically for that position than, wins and losses. This isn't just an Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson kind of deal. This is much more broad than that. And I think the SMU visit and really momentum at this point reflects that very much.
You mentioned the transfers a moment ago, so I want to go there next. Shail Garnett He's a freshman backup quarterback at Auburn this past year. He's in the transfer portal. He's getting a ton of looks from a lot of Power 5 programs, a lot of interest. Any insight into what he's considering and where you think he may end up?
Yeah, we spoke to Garnett recently at SI, and his options are wide open. He's getting a lot of interest from the SEC, ACC, and beyond. And I think when you get into the beyond, there's an obvious connection with Gus Malzahn, right? He committed and signed to Gus out of high school, and Gus is, of course, now at UCF, where they've done some things at the quarterback position, and there is a real expectation that UCF continues that continuity offensively under Gus Malzahn. So the familiarity there, I think, is going to help the Knights stay in the fight. But, Florida State, Tennessee, several other schools are really heavily involved at this point. Virginia Tech just reached out, Indiana as well. So programs outside of the footprint that have had recent success offensively. And really what Garnett wants in terms of what he says he wants is that chance to be a leader. I don't even think the system or a high-flying offense is high on his priority list. It's really about his chance to come in and make an impact. He came into Auburn following Bo Nix, who was really sort of the guy from day one. He wants a chance to be that guy from day one when he arrives at whatever program is lucky enough to get him. He's gotten a lot bigger as well since he got to Auburn, 6'3", 225. He shared some practice highlights with us that look pretty good. He's known as a dual threat, but that arm is looking really good right now as well. And everybody wants to build depth in the quarterback room. So not a surprise to see such a variety of programs courting Garnett. And I think, he's back home in Lakeland, Florida, and I think he's going to sit back and look at his options, maybe take a couple of visits and make a decision relatively soon, because as you know, fall camp will be here before you know it, and he wants to be in place, of course, by that time.
We talked about Arch Manning. Let me ask you about another quarterback out of Louisiana, and Eli Holstein from Zachary, Louisiana. What can you tell us about him?
If there was no Arch Manning in this Louisiana class of 2023, it would really be all about Holstein. Big physical presence, another kid who's already 6'3" in that 220-pound range. I've watched him a couple times on the 7-on-7 circuit. He runs with the bootleggers, which is really the typical or the classic Louisiana 7-on-7 program, and he's lit it up at several different events. Really clean motion. Another prospect who's a good athlete, and the offer list reflects that. This is a more conventional recruitment, though, in my mind. I think this will be SEC heavy. LSU absolutely involved, but how do you now approach this if you're at Orgeron, if you're that coaching staff offensively, because Arch Manning is sitting right there in the class? How do you navigate those two quarterbacks? If you take Holstein, does it push Manning elsewhere, or does it even matter? Those are questions I don't have the answers to. And sometimes you don't really know until it actually happens. So he had a huge sophomore season. I think LSU's got a real chance to reel him in if they want, but A&M is right there with Jimbo Fisher, another coach known for that quarterback position. So I do think that it's going to be quite the battle between these two, but it's got that extra caveat of what does Arch Manning have to do with this recruitment? And I think that could affect everything from his offer list to the timeline to where he makes an actual decision. But there's no doubt that he is a Power 5 quarterback prospect who does have some similarities to Manning, again, especially in the height, mechanics, and athleticism department, which is obviously important at that position.
You've covered this for a long time. You covered Alabama recruiting for a long time. Is there any slowing down with what Nick Saban is doing?
I get asked this a lot, and it's just hard to see at this point. 5 years ago, I would get questions about other coaches asking recruits, how long they think Nick Saban will be there. And, that was kind of the only real, move or weapon to use against Alabama on the trail. And years later, we're still asking the same thing. He's in great shape and seems really hungry for the job. Every time he wins a title, the Alabama fan base is like holding their breath. Like, is he going to walk away? Is he going to do a John Elway here and kind of win the title and just be good with that as a career? But as we've come to learn, there's not a whole lot of relenting in what Nick Saban does. So there's no reasonable doubt to think he's going to, not be that head coach for the next 5, maybe more years in Tuscaloosa. And I think beyond his endurance, what has been impressive is his ability to survive throughout so much coaching turnover. At the beginning, it was all the great defensive coaches that he had. We talked about Kirby Smart earlier, those guys getting head jobs and him having to adjust. And then, after Lane Kiffin, he gets this great offensive reputation to let those guys play. And now he's replacing great offensive minds all the time. But he's had this continuity with the system, and I think it trickles down into recruiting. And kids sort of know what they're going to get at Alabama. There's not much it has to sell, which is why it was a runaway #1 class in a pandemic. Kids were okay signing with Alabama sight unseen because they knew what they were getting. It was going to be a pro-structured program that was going to let the best kids play. And I think that continuity at the top has really changed everything in the recruiting business. But what's scary now is Alabama's digging into that transfer market a little bit, right? We've seen Henry T. from Tennessee head over to Tuscaloosa, receiver from Ohio State as well. So now all of a sudden, the guy who was against all of these transfer rules, who didn't want free agency in college football, says, okay, I'll adjust to that and take advantage as well, just like we saw him do on the field when that spread offense really took him off guard, in the Johnny football and Auburn eras there earlier in the last decade. So Nick Saban adjusts all the time. He seems ever hungry and ready to roll. So there's really no reason to think that it's going to slow down.
Is anybody closing the gap on him from a recruiting standpoint? I mean, we've talked about Kirby Smart and what he's done at Georgia. Jimbo Fisher making a promise to some Texas A&M boosters last week in Houston or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, that, they were going to beat Alabama while Saban is there. Georgia or Texas A&M, who I think are probably right now would be the two teams that you would point to as having the best shot. How close are they from a recruiting standpoint?
From a recruiting standpoint, they're right there. Georgia has outpaced Alabama in a couple of recruiting classes here in the last half decade or so, and A&M is right on Alabama's heels. It seems like every single year. And those are some of the few programs that head-to-head in the SEC have won battles over Nick Saban for Recruit X. Nick will go into other states and really prioritize prospects. We've seen him dominate the state of Louisiana at times. We've seen him dip into Texas and certainly into the state of Georgia. But those programs have collectively bucked back and started to reclaim a little bit more of that going forward. So we'll see how that plays out. But, those three in the SEC, I think, are still there from a talent perspective. And then, of course, Ohio State and Clemson nationally are right there from a recruiting and an on-field product. And most importantly, maybe from an NFL perspective in terms of producing players, they're right there as well. So it's really that group behind Alabama. It sort of fluctuates, but from a recruiting standpoint, all those coaching staffs have a stable leader there at the top, and they've been able to have their own level of continuity just like Nick has. And I think that's really, the ultimate compliment, again, especially in the SEC, because because of Alabama for a large part, there's been a lot of turnover in that conference in terms of coaching staffs, in terms of philosophies, things like that. So I think anybody who can have some stability despite that has a chance. And those are some of the programs locally and nationally that have done the best job.
I want to stay with the quarterbacks, and I want to talk about another young guy, class of 24, CJ Carr. If the name sounds familiar to people, it should. It's Lloyd Carr, the old Michigan coach. It's his grandson. He's a quarterback. How good is CJ Carr?
You'll be shocked to learn that Michigan has already offered CJ Carr. So when we're talking class of 2024, we're talking today a high school freshman heading into his sophomore season, and it's kind of chalk with these legacy prospects. You're just seeing a lot of maturity in general with America's youth, but when you couple it with, I guess, the expectation of pressure and the expectation to sort of be there mentally and from a maturity standpoint, you're starting to see it. CJ was at one of these Elite 11 regionals recently, and our guys there loved him. They said they couldn't believe that he was a freshman. And of course, once you see the kid and you watch him throw and then you learn the name, you're like, oh, okay, you're starting to put two and two together. So a lot of classic quarterback traits here. Really good with his footwork in the pocket, and the arm, although young, is there, right? It's not going to blow you out of the water at this point. It's not Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, but you're talking about a 14 or 15-year-old kid at this point. But the foundation is absolutely there from a physical standpoint. And then from a maturity standpoint, you see a different kind of demeanor with some of these prospects. CJ has it. Arch has it. A lot of these kids coming up now, there's almost like an expectation. If you're a quarterback, you carry yourself in a certain way because the cameras are on you just younger and younger in the process. And now he's starting to pick up scholarship offers. As we mentioned, Michigan is on board, Michigan State, the rival as well. I think he's got a couple other Big Ten offers at this point. Nebraska's in there as well for CJ Carr. He's a Michigan kid, so that's certainly, in terms of his location, he's a Michigan kid. So I think it's going to be a Big Ten style recruitment. But just like we said with Manning, I think a lot of programs are going to see that last name and give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt just because of the legacy and what it means and frankly, what you've come to expect from those type of prospects. But he's certainly a name to keep an eye on.
Tell me about Jalen Walker, the linebacker from North Carolina that's committed to Georgia.
Well, when Georgia recruits linebackers, they're asked to do many, many things, right? Even your conventional inside guys, your Roquan Smiths, your Nakobe Deans, those guys are asked to now play 3 downs, run sideline to sideline, and kind of control the second level to a larger degree than we've ever asked that position to do. And then, you watch this kid play and you see some of those same traits. Now, I think what the difference is, you look into size, right? Because the real knocks on those two guys I mentioned, Roquan Smith, Nakobe Dean, not the biggest cats in the world. Roquan was probably 6 foot. Nakobe Dean might be 5'11", even though they do have an athletic skill set that allows them to do a little bit more. Well, this kid's already 6'2", 6'3", 225. So this is a different dynamic when you're talking about from a height weight standpoint, and the athleticism, while similar, can allow you to do maybe a little bit more than you could with those prospects. It might not be as polished sideline to sideline as the defense call the defense inside backer, but now you offer some pass rushing ability, some ability to play in space and cover a little bit with his plus athleticism. And I think that's where you start to get a different type of prospects. When you talk about adjusting like we did with Nick Saban, that linebacker position has ballooned to really like a jumbo athlete position where you have to do everything. You got to rush the passer, you got to stuff the run, you got to run with the tight end, and heck, you got to cover a great running back or a slot out of the backfield. And I think here you see a prospect with the ability to do those things. He's got good ball skills, for a big linebacker, which is not something we always say in this business. So again, when you talk about linebackers at those elite programs, they're going to be asked to do a lot of things, and Jalen Walker can do almost all of them at this point. And he's got a whole nother year of high school, of course, in this class of 2022. So when Georgia goes up into the Carolinas, it's usually for a pretty good reason, and I don't think he's an exception.
Bear Alexander out of Fort Worth, Texas, another Georgia commit. He's a 5-star defensive tackle. I love the name, right? Big Bear. That's great. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, it is a fitting name, 6'4". I've heard 330, 325 when you're talking about how big this kid is. We recently saw him at an event, and he looked like a bear and played like one too. And I think that's the biggest difference at that position. I think linebackers now, we talk about those guys maybe adjusting to space and maybe being a little bit more finesse than they were 20 years ago. Up front in the middle, like Bear Alexander is as a defensive tackle, you can't play with finesse. It's got to be a ferocious leverage and point of attack style to get the job done. And I think he does that against the run as well as any prospect in this class, where the evolution is at that position is now, can you push the pocket from the interior? Can you collapse the pocket and disrupt the timing of these wide open pass first spread offenses? And I think that's where Bear's power can really come in and be utilized in a different way than just as a gap occupier or as a run stuffer. And I think that's why he's so coveted. As you mentioned, Georgia commitment, and he's bounced around to different high schools, and he's kind of dominated at all of these high schools. So I really don't see a reason, especially in the state of Texas, to consider Bear anything other than a top 10 defensive tackle in this class. From a classic standpoint and from an updated adjustment and space standpoint, he still really fits the bill as a potential 3-down lineman, despite being one of the bigger prospects that we'll talk about as a highly ranked, a highly thought of prospect, regardless of what type of defense you run, what type of style you roll with. Bear Alexander sort of fits what you do. And again, few programs have recruited the D-line better than Georgia of late. They just had another first rounder go off the board with Ojulari. And I think that trend is going to continue. The Trevon Walkers of the world will be right there in years to come. And there's no reason to think that a Bear Alexander can't be one of those next guys up in Athens. And I think that's a big reason why he committed to Georgia.
John, before we let you go, tell us about SI All-American and kind of what you guys have going on and what's coming up.
Yeah, really excited. As we kind of said here, June is going to be a little wild in the recruiting business. It'll easily be the craziest June we've ever seen. So we're definitely tracking that. And then we've got some rollouts to pair alongside it. We're going to do our first updated class ranking on June 1st, and then we'll get into some SI All-American preseason candidates in the month of July, along with all the other camp coverage and usual evaluations and player blogs that we like to feature on the site. So we urge you to check us out at siallamerican.com.
John, thanks for the time, my friend. As always, great to catch up. We'll do it again soon.
Sounds good, Chris. Thanks for having me.
All right, that's our friend John Garcia Jr. from SI All-American. Appreciate John spending some time with us. Got a chance to talk to him about a lot of guys, not just locally per se, or even guys that are, considering Georgia or Georgia Tech, but we got an opportunity to talk to him about some of these national guys. He mentioned Arch Manning and kind of what's going on there, and I had to ask him about SMU. Being on the list, and the former Falcons coach in June Jones is clearly the guy's making he's making a name for himself a little bit there. We know about the offense that June Jones has ran, and that's what he's famous for. And but it was a little strange when you start looking at Arch Manning and where he's going to take his official visits, and Georgia, Clemson, Alabama, you kind of expect those schools, but then bam, you see SMU jump out there. That's it's a little different. Good for SMU. I don't know that they're going to land the kid, but hey,
are they bringing back the Pony Express? What's going on out there, man?
Good Jones, man, to be able to to get it to this point where that kid's interested, and again. Look, he's a guy that is tutored a lot of quarterbacks that have put up a lot of big numbers, and I guess that's what Arch Manning is looking for. But we'll see.
It seems like these kids are getting younger and younger too. That they're recruiting. I mean, Arch Manning is what, 16 years old, 15 years old.
Yeah, he just finished his sophomore season of high school, so
that's crazy.
He will be a rising junior. I think Lloyd Carr's grandson, CJ Carr, that we talked about, he just finished his 9th grade year. So, yeah,
I remember what I was like when I was in 9th grade, and I couldn't even think about college, much less NFL career potentially.
You guys remember Dylan Moses, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Played linebacker at Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
Go look up. There was a video that went viral of Dylan Moses when he was in the 8th grade.
I remember.
And he played he played running back in the 8th grade. And he's like 6 feet tall, 220 pounds as a 13-year-old. And he's like it's like the Derrick Henry stiff arm with these kids. And all of a sudden they go flying out of the frame of the shot with him. So, and he started getting offers that early.
Nick Saban offered him on the spot, probably.
Yeah. He was getting offers at 13 years old. So
it's crazy.
It's crazy, and the craziness is coming back. You heard John talk about the fact that starting next month, when June, these guys will be able to get back to on campus visits. Later on, we're going to have the in-home visits with coaches are going to resume. And once that happens, we'll be back pretty much to normal from a recruiting standpoint. So Of course, everybody just put the wraps back in February on their classes for 2021. Georgia finished ranked 4th nationally. That's according to 24/7 Sports. Georgia Tech finished finished 47th nationally. Little bit interesting there for Georgia Tech. They finished higher in the 2020 class than they did in 21, but the class that they're working on right now for 2022, and granted it's really early, is ranked higher than both their 2020 and their 21 class. So I think that's a good sign for Jeff Collins and what he's able to build there. So, guys, let's talk a little bit about this group of freshmen at both Georgia and Georgia Tech who can see the field early. You know, maybe not necessarily this year, but let's just talk about who can see the field early on in their career. Couple things. Georgia's 5-star guys are at quarterback, offensive tackle, and outside linebacker. What do we know you have to win in football today? You got to have a quarterback. You better have a good one. You better have an offensive line, and in particular, a left tackle. And you better have guys that can rush the quarterback and get him on the ground on the opposing team. And that's what they've done in going out in getting the 5-star kids that they have signed. As far as, and we'll get to both of you guys here, but as far as I'm concerned, in regards to who can see the field for Georgia, I think Georgia's got this thing to the point now to where they are deep enough that it's not like you're counting on a lot of freshmen to come in and contribute right away. Maybe you could see some wide receivers get a chance to play. Maybe you could see some defensive backs. And I think that's two areas where guys, especially if you're athletically gifted enough, you can come in and perform. But in terms of Georgia really necessarily needing guys to commit or come in and play right away, I don't really see that from them at this point.
No, I really don't see that either. I mean, Nyland Green, David Daniels, Kamari Lassiter, you touched on some of this, the defensive backs. Just because they lost so much talent to the NFL draft, they had 4 guys drafted just last week. That's really the spot that I could see them potentially coming in and playing as freshmen. But even then, they're still probably going to be reserve guys. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Georgia has recruited so well. I mean, I think this is Kirby Smart's 5th consecutive top 4 class. And with that comes, I mean, this team's talented and it's deep. And I think that's really a plethora of riches for Kirby Smart. And it's a good thing that he doesn't have to rely on these guys.
Ken, any thoughts?
Yeah, when we talk about guys playing early for UGA, they really have to show it in practice. I mean, we have a Darius Mims, offensive tackle, coming in the fall who could push for playing time and 2 deep in the offensive line. But they really need help in the secondary, and they have some guys there that's already there. But a guy that really impressed me, especially in the spring game, was Nyland Green, the 4-star prospect at cornerback. I think he may not start, but I think he'll get a lot of playing time probably there. And Adonai Mitchell, with George Pickens being down, he gets to see a lot of playing time at that spot as well, especially with his spring game that he had. But there's a lot of guys coming in the fall that are going to fight for playing time. So the guys that are there early have a leg up, but the guys coming in, there's a lot of 5-stars coming in too. So they'll have something to say about that as well.
Yeah, Mitchell was the one guy for Georgia at the skill positions that I could see that has clearly, I think you saw enough of him in the spring game to understand that they like that guy. They like what they see in him. I think he's somebody that has a chance that could come in and be part of that wide receiver rotation pretty early on. Now, for Georgia Tech guys, I think it's a completely different story. Jeff Collins is still trying to get his guys in place here, trying to get the guys that he wants here, the type of athlete that he wants. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for guys to be able to come in and compete right away. They had 7 that enrolled early, including 4 defensive guys. And I think that is where, look, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago about what needs to happen for Georgia Tech. Well, you know, Jeff Sims has got to get better at quarterback. They got to continue to find ways to get the ball to Jahmyr Gibbs, cut down on the mistakes, blah, blah, blah. But we also talked about some of those horrible numbers last year that Georgia Tech put up defensively. They've got to get better on that side of the ball. I think there's going to be some opportunity for some of those guys to be able to come in and to be able to play right away on the defensive side. I also think there's a chance for some skill guys, especially at wide receiver. And let's add tight end into this mix as well for them, simply because if you want your quarterback to take the next step, you got to give him some guys that he can get the ball to, that can go make plays. And they've got James Blackstrain, a wide receiver who's coming from Florida, Leo Blackburn, who's a tight end from Westlake High School. So they've got a couple of guys that on offense that are going to be able to come in and play. But it wouldn't surprise me if we didn't see, 3 to 4 guys as freshmen, true freshmen, play a lot for Georgia Tech this year on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, that's the recruiting picks Jeff Collins has right now is, hey, we don't have a lot of depth anywhere on our football team, so if you can play and you can show me you can play, you're going to play early. The one guy I have singled out is at the time position, that Leo Blackburn. He's definitely probably going to play early. He actually played wide receiver at Westlake, had over 1,000 yards receiving and 10 touchdowns last year. So he's versatile, and he can catch the ball. And that's what Georgia Tech needs right now. They're bringing in wide receivers through the transfer portal, and they're bringing in wide receivers in a recruiting class, but they need to get that tight end going, because that's what really going to let Jeff Sims take it to the next level. That tight end could be that security blanket for him. So if Leo Blackburn can go in there, show he can play and catch passes for Jeff Sims, I think that makes this Jeff Collins offense that more potent.
Yeah, but I'm actually most interested in a lot of these transfer guys, and I'm really counting that as recruits. I mean, I think they went back and regraded a lot of the older classes for Jeff Collins, and they graded them with these new recruits. Not with the recruits, but with the graduate transfers. And really, who I'm looking at, like we talked about wide receivers, Kyrie Mcgowan from Northwestern. I think we've mentioned him in weeks past. I think he's going to come in and be an immediate impact kind of wide receiver guy, a safety blanket of sorts for Jeff Sims. But you look on the defensive side of the football, you look at Kenyatta Watson, who's a big physical 4-star cornerback from Texas, who's going to come in and play the exact kind of defense that on the outside that Jeff Collins really wants to play out there. And he hasn't really had that on the outside. And I think that Kenyatta Watson can come in and be an immediate impact player. He didn't really get a lot of PT over at Texas. I think I only think he appeared or started one game over for Texas last year. Before announcing that he was going to transfer. But another guy I'm looking at is from Old Dominion, Keon White. And yes, he comes from an FCS school, but at the same time, when he did go up and play Virginia Tech, he showed out. I mean, he was the exact same player against an offensive tackle who's going to be playing on Sundays. And his play did not drop off at all. He's going to come in and immediately get after the passer. It's something they desperately need over there at Bobby Dodd Stadium. And Jeff Collins got a good one in Keon White, and I think that's really going to go do a lot of good, bringing in some leadership, bringing in some depth. And I think Jeff Collins got exactly what he needs. He's guys who can start right now.
Yeah, he got 9 of those guys. There's 9 transfers.
A lot from big schools, too. You got some Alabama transfer in there. I mean, he went out in his transfer report and said, "Let's come here. You're going to play right now."
Right. I mean, that's the sales pitch at Georgia Tech is come on. We got a spot for you. I agree on Kyrie Mcgowan. I think he finds the field pretty early there. He's the transfer at wide receiver from Northwestern, and I think it's going to be a big part of what they do early. And it's amazing, guys, how the transfer portal, like it or hate it, and I know you talk to people around college athletics, and you're going to hear a whole bunch of varying opinions on it, but look, it's kind of changing the game a little bit in regards to recruiting, the idea of, free agency, if you will. And look at what Alabama did. They went out and got Henry To'o from Tennessee. That's an impact player. I mean, he's a good player, and he's an impact player that will be on that Alabama defense next year. So if Nick Saban is starting to dabble in the transfer portal, then this is something that, again, it's another one of those ways, I think, in which Nick Saban shows you how
he stays on the cusp.
He's
always ahead of the game.
He's
always
not
ahead of the
getting
game.
left behind, right?
No.
Not getting left behind. He revamped that offense when he had to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm not going to say he's revamping his recruiting because the recruiting hasn't been but I think he sees the value and the benefit of them being able to go out and pull in these transfer guys. Obviously, Georgia did the same thing. They needed a quarterback with some experience. They went out and got JT Daniels.
Yep.
And then, again, Georgia Tech bringing in 9 guys. Then there's going to be some opportunities for those guys to be able to step in and play. Now, that's a look back at 2021. Let's talk about the 2022 recruiting rankings. Let's start first. Let's stay with Georgia Tech for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And let me say this as we get into this. It's way too early. Right, in terms of where what's going to happen here. The good news is, as I mentioned earlier, Georgia Tech's recruiting really well for this. They're building a nice class for 2022 if they can hold on to what they've got. They got 3 4-stars committed right now. So it's hold on to that, guys. Continue to build. When you talk about the ACC, and again, Tech's doing a nice job. Clemson, Dabo is going to be there. Right now, they are 3rd in the ACC. Boston College is 2nd, according to 24/7's rankings in recruiting. They do have 11 commits, but Boston College won't be 2nd by the time this thing's all said and done. The 2 schools that could be there, though, are North Carolina. Mac Brown's doing an amazing job for a guy that is as old as he is. And I have thought for a long time that recruiting is a young man's game, right? For Mac Brown to recruit as well as he has at North Carolina, man, I just, again, he put together a heck of a staff there. And I think North Carolina's doing a really good job. And right now, the number 1 recruiting class in the ACC with 9 commitments, including 2 5-stars, is Florida State.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what happens if Florida State now, you talk about trying to get Florida State back to, where they once were, to restore the glory, if you will, at Florida State. And this is how you do it, is you go out and start out recruiting people. And, are they going to be able to hold on to that top spot? Probably not. I still think it's going to be Clemson, but I totally could see Florida State right in that mix with North Carolina in the, the top 3 or 4 in the ACC come next year.
No, absolutely. I mean, the craziest thing about Mac Brown, though, I just want to go back to that for a quick second. It's not even the fact that he's old. It's the fact that he's been around the block a couple times. Let's put it that way. It's the fact that he goes off to Texas, retires for about almost a decade, and then jumps back into the game and just picks up right where he left off. But not even that. He gets better as a recruiter. And it's crazy to me that he's been able to do that at North Carolina. And Florida State, I mean, that's a program. It's a blue blood program. It's a program that's been very good for many, 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 many years. And it's not going to stay down for long. As long as they jump back into the recruiting game, they're in a hotbed state down in Florida. I don't expect them to stay down for long. But Dabo Swinney, he's the king of the ACC. He's going to be the king of the ACC as long as he's there. And I don't see Clemson going anywhere anytime soon, but it all starts with recruiting, and Dabo Swinney has shown that he can do that just as good, if not better, than anybody in the country.
I would love to see. I think there's a book that could be written about North Carolina football right now with Mac Brown. I would love to see what the day-to-day operations like within that football facility. How involved is Mac Brown in all of this? Is he more of the CEO guy? Is he making in-home visits, or will they just bring the kids into him and, Mac, puts on
flashes the rings.
Yeah, he puts on his championship rings, and the kid comes in and they sit in Mac's office and they chit chat, and he, taps the ring on the desk a few times, and the kid's like, okay, I'm committing. I'd love to see what that's like. I think Phil Longo, man, is a heck of an offensive coordinator. And they've clearly, Ken, they've built a good staff for recruiting at North Carolina. I mean, it just, you can tell just by the results they're getting.
Yeah, 2 things I noticed about North Carolina is they've really focused on those North Carolina recruits to make them stay home. They're kind of owning North Carolina right now. So if I'm Mac Brown, I'm like, hey, don't go anywhere. Don't go to Clemson. Don't go to South Carolina. Don't go into Georgia. Stay here, right at home, and let's get this thing done. And the thing I noticed about going back to Florida State is they've taken a page out of Bobby Bowden's book, and they've really heavily recruited the South Georgia guys and started getting those South Georgia guys to come to Florida State. Which after Bobby Bowden left, some of those South Georgia guys went to Georgia, they went to Florida, didn't really go to Florida State. Now they're going back into South Georgia, recruiting and getting those guys to come to Florida State. And I think that's a big turnaround for Florida State going forward.
Let's move on to the SEC now for a second. As it stands currently, and again, it's way too early to be talking about recruiting rankings, but we're using it as a jumping off point here. Georgia's number one. They've got 3 5-stars committed, a total of 12 commitments. Clearly Kirby Smart, you can knock maybe a lot of things about Kirby Smart, but you can't knock the job the guy does in recruiting. LSU is number 2. They've got 3 5-stars as well. Texas A&M is up there at number 3. Alabama down at number 7. That will be changing. The one, though, that stands out to me, guys, when I look at the SEC right now and the way recruiting is going thus far, is Tennessee. Tennessee in at number 12. Even when Tennessee's had some bad years, whether that's under, Butch Jones or Jeremy Pruitt, Tennessee was always able to finish. Now, they might finish in the 20s nationally, but they would finish in the top half of the SEC in recruiting. I don't know that Josh Heupel is built to recruit in this conference. Losing Henry To'o, I think, is huge. Ken, you mentioned about kind of what Florida State's doing in South Georgia. And you guys have mentioned, we've talked about North Carolina and Mac Brown keeping Carolina guys. North Carolina used to be a huge hotbed for Tennessee because the University of Tennessee is right there on the Carolina border.
Yep.
You can hop over it. Hop down to Murphy, North Carolina, and pick up Carl Pickens. That's what Johnny Majors did, 30 years ago. So that has always been a good state. That has changed. Recruiting in the state of South Carolina changed when Steve Spurrier got there. The Jadeveon Clowneys and the Lattimores and all those guys, the wall was built. You didn't get out of that state. Dabo's doing the same thing now. You're not leaving South Carolina. You're going to go play at Clemson if you're a great player, and certainly Georgia's got just a wealth of talent in this state from a high school football standpoint, just a ridiculous amount of talent. And Kirby's, the recruiting rankings show he goes in and gets the guys that he wants. So you're not coming down to Atlanta like Philip Fulmer did and walking out with Jamal Lewis anymore. That is all changed. And so, when you talk about what the problem that Tennessee has, I think it's just the dynamic shift that recruiting has taken in the SEC that hurts them as much as anything else. And, a little shocking to see them off to and again, it's early, not saying it's time to panic, but it is a little shocking to see them get off to such a slow start in recruiting. I mean, it makes I've wondered, I think Josh Heupel can coach offense, but I've wondered since he was hired, was he ready and is he able to recruit at the level you have to recruit at in the SEC, because he's never done that before at Central Florida.
Well, Chris, one thing about Tennessee is that, really, when did Fat Phil move on? Phil Fulmer, like 2008, 2009, or when he got let go?
At the end of the 2009 season, I guess. So
something weird.
Lane Kiffin's year was 2010.
Yeah, something weird that we might actually have to start thinking about is these kids that are going out and committing in this next class. They were probably like 6 years old when that was happening.
These kids,
their whole life, Tennessee has been the garbage can with Butch Jones, and they've been just kind of a rough program. And I mean that with all due respect to Tennessee, because they are they're a fantastic program. They're one of the top programs historically in this country, especially in this conference. But really, the last decade, these kids have never seen a dominant Tennessee team that could come out week in and week out and compete. I mean, hell, they haven't beaten Alabama in 15 years, 20 years. I mean, it's insane. And so I don't know if he wants to come in and start pulling these kids in, he really has to change this culture, and he has to change it in a hurry. Otherwise, Tennessee is going to be starting to see the bottom half of the SEC in these recruiting rankings for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's a little shocking to see them, even though they haven't been good necessarily. You know, I've said it before on College Football Game Time with John and Randy. Tennessee's won in February, right? They won in the recruiting battles, but it never translated onto the field, or at least it didn't consistently translate onto the field for them. So,
Chris,
we'll see
one thing I've noticed about Tennessee since Lane Kiffin left, besides they haven't won a lot, and that's a lot, but they've been really boring to me. I mean,
I think Heupel's going to fix that. I think offensively, they're going to be fun to watch. I don't know how many games they're going to win. I don't know how good they're going to be defensively right now. But I think Josh Heupel will at least make them entertaining.
Yeah, I think so too. I think if you have kind of like a Lane Kiffin type of year, like he not win a lot, maybe win in 5-6 games, but make the offense look exciting, he could get more recruits in 2021 and beyond. But just by name alone, Josh Heupel going into Tennessee, I would have transferred out of there too. It's not exciting on the surface, but what he can bring in his offense later down we'll see this season. I think that could be exciting to recruits in Tennessee moving forward.
Guys, before we wrap it up, any other thoughts on the SEC and the groundwork that's being laid for the 2022 recruiting class?
Well, I have two things real quick. So I'm going to pull it back to 2021, and this is the whole thing with college football and recruiting and the way it's been for at least the better part of the decade or last 15 years. It's that the rich just continue to get richer.
Yeah.
I think Clemson, University of Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, I think those guys accounted for, just in the 2021 class, 21 of the 32 total 5-stars, including 15 of the top 20 players in the country. And until other programs can start stepping up and peeling some of this talent away, we're going to continue to see some of these same teams in the college football playoff year in and year out. And it all starts in recruiting. And a lot of people don't pay attention to recruiting, but this is where it all begins.
Well, look, there's something to be said, and I'm not a huge believer in stars. And, Randy McMichael and I, we've talked a lot about this. This was again, I'm not a huge believer in stars, but you start looking at the guys in the NFL draft, and I don't know if it's The Athletic or somebody went and did an article this week on how many 5-star, how many of those guys that were drafted this week or 2 weeks ago now, whatever it was, how many of those guys were 5-stars, 4-stars coming out of high school. There's, look, do they hit all the time on all those guys? No, but there's some, those guys are 4 and 5 stars a lot of times for a reason. So you either go get those kind of guys, or you do a heck of a job at developing what you've got.
And you look at where they go to. So they're going to these top programs. It's not a 4-star or 5-star guy going to a smaller school or something and kind of just disappearing. They go to these top flight coaches who have shown that they can continue to develop talent and put guys into the draft. But one other thing about the class of 2022, one guy that John Garcia and you talked about right at the end, Bear Alexander, you match him up with somebody who I see as a headliner of this 2022 class, Walter Nolan. He's up in Tennessee, St. Benedict. And you pair those two guys together at University of Georgia. Both are still Bear's already at UGA, or he's just committed already. And Walter Nolan is very much in the running to go to UGA. You put those two guys like that together, that could very well put the University of Georgia as the most dominant defensive line really for the next 3-4 years. So that would be something that I'm really going to keep your eye on. If you're looking at recruiting, I'm looking at Walter Nolan.
All right, guys, what are we doing here next week?
What is next week?
What is next week? I don't even know what tomorrow is. But I think we're giving some SEC, ACC previews.
I don't have a plan next week, so I was just going to see what you guys had planned. Anyway, join us again. We do this every Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. It's college football game time. Garrett Chapman is right here. Ken is over here, and I'm Chris GoForth. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next Tuesday night. Have a great evening.